The Trans-Alaska Pipeline stretches across the vast Alaska landscape, from Prudhoe Bay in the Arctic Circle to Valdez on Alaska's southern coast, crossing rivers and streams, mountain passes and canyons for 800 miles. The pipeline was the largest construction project of its kind and attracted thousands of men and women from across the United States to come to Alaska. Since the completion of the pipeline 41 years ago, over 17 billion barrels of oil have flowed through it, boosting the Alaska economy and providing thousands of people with jobs. The history of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline begins in March of 1968 with the discovery of a large oil field on the northern coast of Alaska at Prudhoe Bay. The Atlantic Richfield Company and Humble Oil and Refining Company, currently named ExxonMobil, struck the oil field and laid claim to it. Once oil was found, engineers began to assess the most efficient method to transport the oil to the lower 48 states. Several options were considered, including 12-engine tanker planes, tanker submarines to go beneath the ice caps, hauling oil via semi-trucks, and an icebreaker oil tanker. None of these options were more safe and cost-effective than building a pipeline. Less than a year after the discovery of oil on the North Slope, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline conglomerate, later known as Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, announced plans to construct an 800-mile pipeline from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez. The pipeline project was met with fierce opposition right from the start. Environmentalist groups wanted to block, delay, and completely cut the project. They cited oil as a finite resource, the potential negative effects on the climate, including fish and wildlife, earthquakes resulting in oil spills, and the disruption of the Alaska Native people's lives. Hundreds of lawsuits and court challenges attempted to undermine the pipeline project for over 4 years. However, the 1973 oil crisis provoked passage of legislation designed to remove all legal obstacles preventing the construction from commencing. On November 16, 1973, President Richard Nixon signed the Trans-Alaska Authorization Act, halting all legal challenges. With the approval from Washington, D.C., the pipeline construction began on March 27, 1975, at the Tonsina River. The men and women who built the pipeline came not only from Alaska, but across the entire United States. A job on the pipeline meant high wages and excellent benefits, even if only for a couple of years. The unions that supplied the workers included the Pipeliners Local 798 out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Teamsters Local 959 out of Fairbanks, Alaska, the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 302, and the Laborers Locals 942 and 341 out of Fairbanks and Anchorage, Alaska. Although numerous other local branches were used, these were the primary suppliers. The pipeliners, better known as the welders or 798ers, performed all of the 108,000 welds that joined the steel pipes together to form the pipeline. The welders were the highest paid of all the workers at $18.25 an hour. In order to get hired, the welders had to be certified through a process of test welds. If any of the welds did not meet the strict standards, the welder was not hired and couldn't attempt it again for several weeks. The welders were known for their experience and high working standards, but they also had a wild side. Throughout the nearly 2.5 years they were contracted, there were numerous brawls and fights that led to arrest and jail time. Other unions complained about the welders' arrogance. One worker stated, "Take your typical 798 pipeline welder and feed him a few drinks, and he'll probably tell you that he's God's greatest gift to welding." The Teamsters Local 959 supplied more workers than any other union for the pipeline construction. The workers incorporated many different types of work, but primarily provided the transportation of workers and supplies to the job sites. All trucks were driven by Teamsters, supply warehouses were run by Teamsters, and the buses that transported workers from camps to job sites were run by Teamsters. Due to the large employment of the Teamsters, they had control of the working conditions. If safety procedures were not being followed or issues not being corrected, union leadership would call for safety meetings, which would prevent the members from working until the issues were fixed. When road conditions were not improved on the Elliott Highway and pipeline management refused to do anything about it, the Teamsters president, Jesse Carr, called for all truck traffic in Alaska to stop until the issues were corrected. The stoppage lasted 4 days, and during this time the workers would meet twice a day to discuss safety. At the time, Carr was quoted as saying, "I've got the hammer to shut it down, and I have." Road conditions were improved, and the truckers went back to work. The operators, Local 302, represented the workers who sat at the controls of the heavy equipment used on the construction of the pipeline. This equipment included bulldozers, cranes, drilling rigs, and side booms, which are a cross between a bulldozer and a crane that laid sections of pipe in a trench parallel to its tracks. In the winter months, 6 operators were assigned to each piece of equipment due to the lack of heating. This led to a popular joke in regards to the job requirements of operators. Must be able to sit on a side boom at 40 below and not freeze up. The laborers locals represented the majority of the less skilled labor on the pipeline. The laborers dug trenches in areas inaccessible by heavy equipment, drilled holes for the pipeline support beams, spread gravel, crushed rock, and moved supplies by hand. Because no special skills were needed for the jobs it filled, the laborers attracted most of the people who came from out of state seeking employment. The hiring process for the laborers was based on seniority and work experience. Members would be categorized into 4 lists: A, B, C, and D. A-list members got first choice when picking jobs. Any work that was left over then went through the B, C, and D list. D-list members rarely got jobs. Although the pipeline construction project primarily attracted male workers, women made up about 10% of the workforce. Alyeska employed many women as secretaries, cooks, and maids, but they also hired women to work as drivers, welders, and general laborers. Alaskan women, as well as women from out of state, capitalized on the opportunity to earn more money than they ever had before. The pipeline workers endured a wide range of working conditions throughout the 2.5-year construction project. First and foremost, the Alaska climate and terrain proved to be a constant challenge throughout the construction of the pipeline. Whether it was the rigid, cold, below-zero temperatures and feet of snow each winter, or the constant changes in elevation due to the mountain passes and canyons, or crossing the hundreds of rivers and streams, the workers were paid as well as they were for good reason: the extreme Alaska climate and terrain. The contracts mutually agreed to by the unions and the Alyeska Corporation were all cost-plus contracts. There was no incentive to keep staffing levels low because all labor expenses would be reimbursed by Alyeska. This factor often led to more people being assigned to a job than there was work to do. There were several reports of workers sleeping through their shifts because there was no work or they had to wait on another craft to finish their job first. One worker stated, "They pay us like princes, but they don't give us any work." Alyeska pushed the blame for the idle workers onto the unions. Teamster President Jesse Carr stated, when asked how he would rate Alyeska's management efficiency, "I'd put him at -5. You know, in all the years that I've been in the construction business and tried to run a local union, I have never seen anything so mismanaged in my 25 years in Alaska." Regardless of who was responsible for the unnecessary cost associated with the idle workers, it didn't stop it from happening. With the number of workers and multiple unions involved with the construction, there was bound to be disagreements between the unions. However, the disagreements escalated into physical violence on multiple occasions. The main culprit were the welders from Tulsa, Oklahoma. They had a reputation for drinking, fighting, and arrogance. This reputation led to a popular slogan among Alaskan residents: "Happiness is 10,000 Okies going south with a Texan under each arm." On top of the extreme weather and geography of Alaska, the women workers had to always be aware of being surrounded by men. Due to women only making up roughly 10% of the pipeline's workforce, they were heavily outnumbered by their male counterparts. This led to the male workers having a mentality of women shouldn't be working on the pipeline, and they doubted any woman's work. The Alyeska Corporation fought this stigmatism and continued to hire women into the labor force. The remoteness of most of the pipeline led to the building of 20 residential camps to house the workers during the construction. The 12 pump stations that were being built to push the oil through the pipeline were also equipped with residential facilities. The camps were of all standardized modular construction. The basic housing units had 28 rooms with space for 56 workers in each wing. They were made of nearly identical pieces put together in similar ways. The camps had a total of 16,500 beds and were home to some 60,000 people over the course of 3 years. Some of the camps were completely enclosed and the workers never had to step foot outside. Other camps had separate facilities for dining and recreation, and the workers were forced to bear the frigid temperatures. The room and board costs were completely covered by Alyeska Corporation. The camps and pump stations were collectively known as Skinny City, which was 800 miles long and only a few hundred feet wide. Life in Skinny City was as enjoyable or as miserable as each worker made it. There were numerous indoor and outdoor recreational activities to do, including volleyball, softball, boat races, yoga, pool, darts, foosball, shuffleboard, cross-country skiing, and hiking. All the camps and pump stations had a list of 22 rules. Workers weren't allowed to sleep on the job, gamble, partake in horseplay, drink alcohol, or use illegal drugs, to name a few. Some of the rules were enforced while others weren't. Alyeska management either turned a blind eye or were participating in the rule breaking themselves. The workers were provided with 3 meals a day and midnight snacks to get them through the night. At the beginning of the construction in 1974, the food was as lavish as a 5-star restaurant. It was common to have steak, lobster, frog legs, beef Wellington, prime rib, or king crab on the lunch and dinner menus. Breakfast saw made-to-order omelets and fresh fruit flown in daily. However, once Alyeska realized how much money was being spent, the cutbacks came rolling in. The menus went from extravagant and exotic to basic cafeteria food. Some workers wrote complaints and petitions to Alyeska, while other workers were still satisfied with the meals. Life at the pipeline camps can be summed up in one quote from a worker. "Life isn't unbearable here, it's just that I'd rather be doing something else." During the peak construction from 1975 to 1977, 27,000 workers were employed and over 70,000 individuals worked at some point in the construction process. The pipeline provided thousands of people with good jobs, even if only for a few years. Due to the influx of people, several Alaskan cities and towns were extremely overcrowded and considered boom towns, including Fairbanks and Anchorage. Traffic was bumper to bumper, and residents were forced to wait for hours in lines at banks, post offices, and grocery stores. Alaska was not prepared for the pipeline population boom. The desirable high-wage jobs on the pipeline caused many businesses to have very high turnover rates. This in turn caused poor customer service on top of the overcrowding, and local businesses saw a decline in revenue. Many Alaskan residents resented the pipeline project and the workers for the negative effects they were having on the local economy. Today, over 127,000 jobs in Alaska are oil-related, and another 60,000 jobs have resulted from the economic benefits created by the oil industry and by the state spending the oil revenue. The pipeline currently accounts for nearly 10% of the nation's domestic energy production, making Alaska the second largest oil producer in the country. While the pipeline was still under construction in 1976, the Alaska Permanent Fund was established in the Alaska State Constitution. The article states, "At least 25% of all mineral lease rentals, royalties, royalty sales proceeds, federal mineral revenue sharing payments, and bonuses received by the state be placed in a permanent fund, the principal of which may only be used for income-producing investments." The current value of the fund is over $65 billion. Since 1982, each Alaskan resident has received over $42,000 in dividends from the fund. 2018's dividend is set at $1,600 and will be dispersed in October. Today, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline is recognized as a modern marvel. Thousands of unionized workers from all across the country overcame the obstacles of the extreme Alaska climate, terrain, and wildlife to construct this monumental engineering feat. Life on the pipeline wasn't perfect. Each worker had their fair share of hardships, but the benefits of employment far outweighed the challenges the workers faced from being away from their family and friends. Although the Alaskan people resented the pipeline project and all the craziness it brought throughout the construction process, the outcome of those few years have been tremendously positive for the Alaskan people and economy. The amount of oil in Prudhoe Bay has declined over the last 20 years, but there are still hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil flowing through the pipeline today and will continue to flow for the foreseeable future.